I think the more time that we can think about our clients, the better we'll be. For a long time, I've always preached like leverage, push tasks down, automate things. If we can get the computer to do stuff for us, fantastic. They have all the information and it has knowledge. It doesn't have expertise. We have the expertise to kind of read between the lines and understand the differences and what those cues are. If we can combo those two things, pull in all that knowledge in a structured way, and then you use your expertise to kind of shape it a little bit, the client's ultimately going to win in that run.
All right, Adam, on this episode of the Modern CPA Success Show, it is you and I talking about things we learned at a recent conference.
Just the two of us. We can make it if we try.
Yeah. So just for quick introductions, within Anders CPA, I'm part of the VCFO division and have the role of being virtual CFO. Adam, you're running that practice and also taking a new role, looking over our advisory practice.
Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed you didn't get my little music reference at the beginning there. I said, just the two of us, we can make it.
I should have. I'm sorry.
You just blew right over that.
I did. Okay. Now you can have me watching this.
I thought I was like, as soon as I heard just the two of us, I was like, that's the first thing that popped in my head. I thought I was being witty and you just smoked right through it.
See if I can pick up on your other ones.
Okay. I won't do it again. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm done for the day.
Since you and I are remote, we don't get to see each other very often, but we did just get back to one of the top CPA firm conferences, the LEA North American Regional Conference for 2026. Just give people a little bit of understanding of LEA, so Leading Edge Alliance Global, one of the largest international CPA alliances. There's about 150 firms and 20,000 professionals that are part of this organization, and Anders is a part of this organization. And you've gone to several of their events as well. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, San Diego is beautiful, obviously, but yeah, it's a great organization in terms of just, just seeing what everybody else is doing, best practices. They have like peer groups that, within your silos in terms of like tax audit, and then they bring us all together for some group learning, but it's a great opportunity just to kind of talk to other people in the same space and try to figure out what they're doing and what they're seeing. So.
Yeah. And this was my first one going, and I could tell, I think I mentioned to you during the conference, probably, I think maybe 200 people there. And I probably met 100. And I bet there were 3 or 4 people who said this was the first time they were attending. There were many people who were like, oh, this isn't every year. I've come like 10 or 15 times. And you could tell as you looked around that it didn't seem like it was, oh, there's a firm table and there's a firm table. People were talking to everyone as if they had known each other for a long time. And it looked like a lot of people had done work together, which is one of the huge parts of let's actually collaborate. And you provide service to my clients where I don't have that to provide.
You were a social butterfly, my friend. 100 of them. Wow.
It was good to meet people. People were pretty open. So if people think about joining, I found it to be a really open and inviting group. It was cool.
For sure.
So we'll talk about a couple themes we heard, and let's talk about what one of the biggest, and of course AI came up, but I don't want to talk AI first because that's what everyone does, even though it's a great topic. One of them was the firm model is changing, and I'll throw out a couple things that they had talked about. And there were 2 people who talked about this in general, Mark Koziel, who's the CEO of AICPA. And then in some, and I'll talk a little bit more, Crystal Washington was a futurist, and less about just CPA specific, but more kind of what's going on. But it was 3 main things that I'd like to talk about. One, they said, hey, this is the end of the apprenticeship model, and I'll expand on that in a second. Digital labor is reshaping the environment, and then ownership versus leadership decoupling. So let's start with the first one. When they talked about end of apprentice model, there was some discussion about including accounting professionals. The way we have learned is we did kind of the grunt work for a long time and had to work through these problems, and all of a sudden we have a really good understanding. Now they're saying, hey, you got AI doing a lot of that kind of work for you, and training is kind of work your way up. That's a lot less visible. People are coming in expecting to enter at higher level roles. So I'm curious, what's your take on that, and what do you think that means to firms?
You said you were going to avoid AI at first, man, and then you just went right at it.
Okay, the end of the apprentice model. Good point. Excellent point.
I mean, AI definitely is, knowledge is out there now, it's at everybody's fingertips. And that's kind of what they were highlighting and just saying, I don't know if the apprenticeship model is going away. I just feel like it's evolving to something different. Whenever I'm working with our team, yeah, I do think some of the blocking and tackling is necessary. I don't know how long it will be necessary. Right now you need to understand some of those underlining things, but there's no question. It's like, you don't have to know how to do long division anymore, right? Because
Yeah.
calculator does it for you. So there are going to be things like bill pay and some of the basic stuff, but you still conceptually need to know if it's right or wrong. You've got to be able to understand that. So there's still some fundamental stuff there that maybe that's just a more focused attention. But I think where we're drifting to is, and this is where the futurist was kind of talking too, but what we're talking about is um, more stuff around the advisory, how you can gain trust with the client, how, it's still going to be human led AI for the most part for a while. Don't get me wrong, there could be a day where the robots take over, but for the most part, people are still going to want somebody navigating that knowledge base with expertise, and expertise comes with experience. And so we got to figure out a way to get these younger folks some experience, and it doesn't have to necessarily be theirs. It can be a shared experience with the rest of the team. So I'm always coaching our team how to be more advisory. So I was working with one of our folks the other day. I was kind of saying, giving him some tips and tricks on how to shorten up the financial statement portion, how to get
Uh-huh.
through it in like 5 minutes really quick. And then I said, and this is how and I was just kind of dropping some hints on how we get into operations, how we get into sales, how we start asking more business conversation, like how we pull that up. And the one thing that the futurist said that and you spoke about training specifically about how some of this stuff goes is rather than, putting them in and having them just do all the blocking and tackling and just get the reps in on some of this accounting work. She talked about more simulation based, think about
Yeah.
like a flight instructor, they, obviously you don't want the person the very first time flying the plane maybe, but you can put them in a simulator that gives them real flight experience. So if we can take some of these conversations and AI can um, customize the content a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that whenever you get into these conversations, like create an agent or a bot that can act like a client, ask questions like a client, and then whenever you respond, instead of it going back to a generic A, B, or C, D answer, it's actually adapting its conversation to the way you're reacting. So you can kind of see, hey, if I turned left, I'm going to nosedive into the bottom of the pit. Yeah, that's what you're doing whenever you're in a simulation. You're actually in control, and those situations are adapting how you're moving the plane. If we can get some better simulated, if we can leverage AI to do those kind of things, I think it'll be pretty cool.
I think you're absolutely right. And that sounds pretty futuristic, but I know a lot of that's already happening. And one example I think of, a good friend he's currently got like a 90-minute commute and he was starting to interview for a new job. Using talking, he was interviewing with Chat GPT and saying, ask me answers and give me feedback. And he said, that's what I was doing for like this hour. And it would remember what he was doing. And so I'm like, that's a really cool idea. And it's not like you have to wait 5 years to do
Oh,
that.
and Jamie, on our team, he's
Yep.
kind of doing that right now. It's a step in the right direction, but again, whenever you go through a training or you watch a video or something, they always ask you the three stupid questions. Basically,
Yep.
just do you remember this exact phrase? Just making sure that trying to get you to pay attention, but not really understand it. Like, right? All you have to do is
Right.
remember something. You don't really have to understand it. Well, he's creating an agent to where whenever you go through it, it's going to ask you a question and then you're going to respond to the question. And depending on how you respond to the question, it's going to keep peppering you until the AI bot feels that you intuitively understand the concept.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, it might ask you three questions, it might ask me 20 questions because it's like, I don't think Adam's getting it. So they're just kind of going back and forth and giving you better answers. So I think that's the evolution of where we're going to be at from a training perspective. But I do think that as a profession, you're still going to have the, permission to play as you're good technically, but it's no different than whenever, well, I did some tax returns by hand, some basic ones, right? Whenever I started working, but um, but it wasn't soon after. Like, I never did a business tax return by hand other than in college, which seemed ridiculous to me. And I was like, how would you not spend 2 months doing this? Well, as soon as you use the tax software, you can do a business tax return in an hour or two, and it can print
Yeah.
out 400 pages,
Yep. Yep.
And so I don't think it's going to be any different that way. I guess the difference is that, um, people relied on our technical expertise on how to put it into the system. Like, we needed to know how to put it in and then how to get the results. People are going to get more and more comfortable, at least on the surface, with being able to put the information in themselves and trust that it's doing it for them. But they're still going to not be confident on whether or not the answer is right.
Yeah.
And that's where we still kind of come in.
I agree. And we talked about in meetings, and I think that's great. And pulling from a different conference I went to, the way the guy said it was great, which was, how often is the very first time someone does something new, like deal with a customer who's really unhappy and wants a rebate on their fee or something like that? That's the very first time I've ever done it. I never practiced that. Or a conversation with a unhappy employee. And he made a really good point of your point around simulations. Why would you not simulate that kind of stuff? And hopefully, as I'm doing it, like, hey, the first 3 times with AI, it went horribly and I got better. And then when I sat in front of the client, it was much easier than what I had done with AI.
Yeah.
And I think it could do similar where we got a lot of automation with AI. Why could it not also do some simulations to say, do you really understand this? Right? I've been using it for a month. It always comes up with all green checks. Everything's great. I hand it off to someone else and say, you don't really have to understand it. The thing runs on autopilot. Could you simulate the point that, like, hey, figure out that something's wrong, even though you're getting green check marks or whatever's telling you that you think it's okay?
The other trend that, I mean, he didn't talk about this, but I've talked to several large firms, and whenever you're talking about training and just that apprenticeship model is changing, all the firms that I've talked to, and by all, that's like 6, but they're pretty large firms. They have all had their not even remotely close, smallest intern class over the last year or two.
Interesting.
Like, literally 20% of the size of what they would normally bring in over the last year. So, so I'm talking to partners that have been there for 20 or 30 years, and they're like, we've never had this small of a intern class ever, like remotely close to this small, even through bad economic times and stuff like that. They're like, it's just super weird. And so we are seeing kind of it is starting to pull back a little bit in terms of, at least in that small population that I've been talking to, which, again, make up some pretty big accounting firms, for them all to be saying, hey, we're just pulling back on interns. They're recognizing that, I guess, is what I'm saying. And that's how they're reacting to it right now. I don't know if that's the right reaction or not, because I think it's changing how the apprenticeship model is, not necessarily just going, oh, now I just need fewer of them. But I think that's their initial knee-jerk reaction because of the AI. They just assume everything's going to get done faster, meaning we're going to need less people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And you do wonder, are some people saying, I don't think I need any? And are they putting themselves in 5 years saying, now I don't have good senior accountants and managers and kind of the promotion path that I wanted to have, and going out and hiring from the outside might not work with that. But that is interesting. And I think you answer what was going to be an immediate follow-up question is, they weren't saying it's because I can't afford more interns. It was really I don't think I need them. I'm using AI. That was their rationale, I assume.
Well, the other one that kind of throws me off a little bit is, what I was thinking is, like, whenever we use outsourced firms like India or the Philippines and things of that nature, we're usually pushing that low level work. So my question to some of the bigger firms is like, so what does that mean? Do we think like AI is are they going to first erode those positions? Like, are the firms in India and the Philippines going to be the first ones to get yanked out, preserve everybody else here? And so it's really going to impact them. I was kind of, and that's where my head was at, was like, hey, their jobs are going to go away first, because those are the ones that can be automated. And what I heard back from several of them was like, no, I think we're actually going to do more in India and the Philippines, because we're going to upskill them and still eliminate maybe the lower level stuff that they're doing, upskill them, and instead of hiring stateside people, we're going to be hiring those folks to be able to do the higher level stuff, which is
Yeah.
why we don't need as big of intern classes. Because that's what I was thinking. I was like, it's not their jobs that are going away. It's these investments that you have in India and the Philippines where you have teams of 100, 200, 500, and they're like, nope, we'll just upskill them and they'll do all the work. And then basically they just need like a stateside, not translator, but they need that stateside face relationship manager kind of to do it. And then they would just have a team of offshore and, so just less and less of those stateside people. I don't know how people will react to that, overall. I think that might eventually be a competitive edge for small to mid-sized firms that aren't outsourcing. I think that, I think there will be a good portion of people that are like, obviously you got to compete on price and that's going to be the difficult thing. But if these bigger firms are just kind of race to the bottom with some of that stuff, I still think they have enough fat in them, that they won't really necessarily be able to, because they're not going to want to give up profits and growth and all that kind of thing. So they're still going to be heavy. They're just going to dilute their workforce by moving it offshore. So I think there's still going to be an opportunity for smaller, even regional firms like Anders just to, non-PE backed, that kind of thing to really to push back there. I think. I don't know. We'll see.
I think that makes it makes tons of sense that you would take, if you're a firm in India saying they also have to upskill, they would see that risk coming, and they've done that. They got people who've done it for years who want to get promoted. I just did a coaching call this week with a CPA who has a VCFO practice, and he mentioned an offshore CFO. And I said, "Oh, would you put them in front of a client?" And he said, "I would." He said, "I thought the guy was American." He didn't say where he was located, but he said, "He sounds great. He looks really good on camera." And so I'm teaching him to be client facing, which we haven't chosen to do. But the flexibility of that, if that team has, could that person be fractional so he doesn't have to hire a full-time CFO when he just gets past the point where he can handle the volume? There's some really cool flexibility that could be offered if that was available to him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not saying that like inherently that people in the US are smarter than people in the Philippines and India. I mean, I believe that they can in both locations, they can probably produce really good CFOs. Um, it's just they've never been asked to. And I think that
Yeah.
the firms that to your point, the firms that exist over there, independent, and the firms that exist over there that are owned by stateside CPA firms, I think the question is, or the quest over the next couple of months and years to come are going to be, I think they're probably positioning themselves to upskill those people, because that's what I was hearing from those firms. And you better believe the firms out there that are independent that serve multiple CPA firms, they're saying the same thing. And we even hear it from the folks that we offshore. They're like, oh, we can do this, we can do that. Sometimes it hasn't really work out, you know what I mean, in terms of their ability to do that. But the same is true for stateside people too. So I don't know. It'll just be interesting, I think, as that market starts to get more and more upskilled, in that space and competing more in that world, because we're all kind of competing against the AI on the lower end stuff, and it's going to push everybody into this singular space.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me jump onto another theme. It's a third one I mentioned, which on growth being inside your client base, that this cross-selling opportunity. And there were some breakouts at this conference, and you led one of the breakouts, and I was in another one that was advisory focused. That was a huge part, if you're an advisory, of them saying that you could sell multiple services into a client. But if we talk some of the pain points that we talked, I think there's a real challenge in most firms that their services and their pricing is siloed. And the way I would describe it is, if you work with 3 or 4 service groups, it feels to the client like they're working with 3 or 4 companies. They just got people to call, but there's not a easy way to do pricing. Often they get multiple engagement letters. When they work with you, one might do things with a certain way of communicating and timelines, and the other one does things differently. Do you see other challenges? I'm curious if you agree with that, and maybe there's some other pain points that I'm not thinking of when I think of what we have to solve with that.
Yeah, I mean, we're guilty of that, right?
Sure.
And so I was actually talking to somebody from LEA, kind of a larger firm. And I was just asking him, like, hey, how'd you solve this problem? Because we need to solve this problem, especially in my new role. That's kind of the idea, especially within advisory. How do we solve that problem? And the
Yep.
firm is going through some initiatives too, wanting to address this as well. And so I just, hey, how'd you solve for this? And he just kind of, is like, well, we haven't.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't, he's like, I see the concern. Hasn't been a huge deal to, for us, but I do think that that's where the opportunity is, right? Is where you can kind of make that seamless. And even if you're a smaller company and you don't have, if you're the 5 to 10 person firm, right now, um, creating some kind of cross-serving relationships with your peer groups, finding people that can do the
Right.
missing pieces that you often see for your clients, and then creating some kind of seamless experience for them to where, you're kind of still quarterbacking everything for them. Have that single point of contact. If you can get the billing, figured out, some kind of JV relationship that's more than
Yeah.
just a referral or a handoff. I know some people don't want to take responsibility for other people's work, and I get that. Or whenever you refer people, you want to refer 3 names out instead of one. Just to say, hey, it wasn't me. I just gave you 3 people that do it in the space.
Yeah.
But I think that, to your point, if you can network a group of professionals that you trust and has a similar working style to you, I mean, I think that that's an approach that smaller firms can win at too, not just the bigger ones.
Yeah, and to make a pitch for LEA, in these meetings, they were talking about templates they have for agreements that firms can have between them that they've already thought through. Like if you and I were different firms, hey, Adam, let's sign this, and then you're not stealing my customers, and I'm giving you this, and we've agreed how billing will work and those things. And a lot of people at my discussion group were talking about that. And just one example, because I introduced him to a client of mine that does cybersecurity work. He's a consultant and advisory that does cybersecurity, but he said, what I need is I don't have any good solution around penetration testing or deepfake video stuff. And that's a demand that a lot of my clients are asking for. So those kind of things could be great. And I don't immediately think of an accounting example, but one where you're like, hey, I can provide most things, but if I could pull someone in and provide that, I offer a broader service to my clients and they're happy. And I can white label it or I can introduce them. There's lots of ways you could do that, but having those contacts makes you act like a bigger firm.
Yeah, 1,000%. So our job is always not to have every solution, but to know people that have those solutions. So again, smaller firms can do that. Even large firms aren't going to have all the capabilities. So that's the reason why we belong to groups like LEA, so that we can lean on other organizations within the group that do have those specialties.
Yeah. So one solution I heard that I thought was interesting is one of the firms said that they have a team member in the firm and they've got a process of a 1 hour client analysis where they're going through analyzing client and identifying opportunities where there could be additional services they could offer. And I kind of like that approach from, I guess, the other way that many firms, including us, do it is a decentralized approach that whoever's got the relationship, there's sort of a general always be thinking of what else could we be doing with people. And the idea of someone sitting down and saying, oh, you've got this kind of profile in this company. Did you know these 3 or 4 different opportunities are there to help someone look at that? So I thought that was a
Yeah.
cool way to do it.
I'm always kind of conflicted. Like, don't get me wrong, like, um, doing the white space board is really good. Like whenever you look at, these are the different services, like each one of these companies are, which ones are they not using and figuring out and plugging and then maybe going at them. But I always just feel like where I think most firms struggle, well, one, yes, people are heads down in their own solution and they're not thinking about other stuff. So there's got to be some kind of awareness. There's got to be a true client relationship manager, somebody that's thinking more about the client more holistically. I think that's what an advisor should be, which is why, I think that the advisory group leads the charge there. That said, I think tax is switching to, tax advisory. I think audit, in order to kind of survive, is going to have some kind of advisory model as well, associated with them. So I think there's an opportunity for everybody to be kind of that client relationship manager and look more holistically at the client. So awareness there for sure, education. But I feel like there needs to be something more on the front end for awareness for the client, and just some kind of tool or something that always brings that awareness to the client that doesn't feel salesy. Because if they come in to talk to me for an advisory job and I sell them on $100,000 job, I can't like 3 weeks later go, oh, well, I got this technology problem for 100,000 and I got this for 100,000. Now, there might be opportunities there because the client wants to go that direction. But as a solution provider, sometimes it's hard to do that. If you're just coming in as a consultant, that's easier. So I think for some of the bigger clients, if you have a consulting practice that just kind of comes in to identify issues and then puts together a roadmap of these are the things that you need, I think that's one solution that you could put in place that would be helpful, to introduce multiple service lines, because then they become kind of the relationship manager. You're controlling the roadmap, of course, with the client's participation and collaboration. And then other than that, I think that the individual service lines, as they get clients, if there's some kind of unified, like, I don't want to say risk assessment, because that one, maybe that sounds too negative. I know we were
Yeah.
talking about that the other day. I think
Yeah.
Dave, our group, was like, I forget what other name that.
Business resiliency was his alternative term that he liked.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
You'd have to wordsmith that. But if there was some kind of, and again, not that you want to assess the client to death. So it's more of an interview. So it's not like a fill this paper out kind of thing and let's see, where you're defunct. It's more of a conversation or a speak track. And then that's your opportunity just to say, hey, if and when you want to work on that stuff, we do offer A, B, and C. Just know that you can come to us, because a lot of times clients, you'll hear them say, oh, I didn't know you offered that. And so there's got to be some level of awareness, not only on the solution provider for us to be able to do that, but there's got to be a tool in a way that makes it easy and not salesy for that point of contact person to be able to make the client aware of it. You don't want to be constantly selling other services. Hey, what other service can you buy from us this week or this month or this year?
Yep.
Let's look and see what you can afford to spend on us. You don't want to be like that.
Right.
But if you're just identifying issues or you're listening to what their issues are and you have some kind of tool in which to kind of like bring them out of the business and think more holistically about what's going on in their organization and where they need help, you can make them aware of the solutions that you have that maybe go beyond you.
Yeah. If I think of one, I'll give you an example where I think one thing that we do really well that would help this, but then a place where we probably fall short on the follow up is in VCFO. When we do our onboarding, we do what we call the back of the napkin meeting, with just a simple idea of, hey, if you and I were sitting here and I said, describe your business on the back of a napkin, we could have a good conversation that would include, hey, do you have like a long-term exit plan? Or does it turn into 5 years what you want this company to be? Biggest challenges, team, things like that. And so you do get that really broad perspective where often they'll say things like, I've always wanted a bonus plan for my team that I haven't put in place. And I'd like to do some kind of equity or phantom equity. And you're getting all these things that could turn into services. That can be the, hey, are you ready to start moving on that? The part where when I don't think we do that well is sometimes that turns into a document that you understand and then you never even come back. And so 2 years into a 3-year plan, I've never even brought back up, oh, next year's when you're supposed to exit. And so that's a place we could do better. But that kind of high level conversation gives you a perfect entry to say, like, okay, are you ready to dive into this piece now? I could bring in resources to help you do that, would be one thing.
Yeah, and that parlayed with your your model for the maturity model is
Yes.
kind of where you're supposed to operationalize that. So
Right.
the thought process behind us building a maturity model was to assess a client where they are, identify where those areas are challenges, and then operationalize that roadmap so that you can identify like, hey, here's 8 problems that you have, but these are the top 2 that we need to tackle, this year. And so there might be things on there that are other services of the firm or your strategic partners that you have that you can introduce. And maybe it's not their top priority, but you can say, hey, next year, whenever that comes up, let's work through these first 2. And then whenever we move to that, I've got somebody that can help you figure that out.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd be curious if you like this approach, but I've started thinking of myself almost the general practitioner if you think in the medical terms, where I'm telling clients, hey, I can do this much. If you want a simple bonus plan and you know exactly what you want it to look like, I'll help you do that. That's pretty easy. If you start getting into things that are more complicated around, I want to really decide what are the behaviors I'm trying to provide incentive for and what are the right measures and all this, let me pull in a specialist and they'll help you work through that. And that's on lots of different ways that you can kind of say, I can help you with some of the common sense, but if it gets bigger, let me pull someone in. Any thoughts on that as an approach?
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I mean, because again, nobody wants to sell to their
Right.
clients.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be selling. I think you should be offering solutions for where there are true needs. It's just sometimes the clients have a hard time identifying what those needs are, and because they don't know that there's a solution available for those needs. And so, by you surfacing those kind of things and having discussions and saying, "No, there are people out there that can fix that," or "I can help with that," there's I think it just offers an opportunity to pull in things more holistically.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. Okay. So that was the one around growing things inside your client base. So I've held off. Now we can talk a little bit more about AI kind of stuff that was in there. Um, okay. So they talked about some of the impacts of AI. And of course, it's kind of everywhere. But I'm curious, one of them that they had talked about was things with client deliverables. And we use things like AI is it's really good since we record meetings at like summarizing meetings and key points. And I've started doing that kind of thing of looking back at multiple meetings and kind of saying, hey, connect some of these things, or what are some good questions to ask, or things like that, that it can be a really useful tool for that kind of thing. Let me stop at that point. Any thoughts on that use of AI? So we record meetings and going ahead and leveraging the transcripts of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to get better at that. I think that it's great that you think about asking those questions. What my perfect world would be: it goes into a database and you get
Yep.
push notifications on
Sure.
just like, hey, here's your weekly summary, and it not only looks at what you did last week, but it's also taking a look back over the last 3 to 6 months. Like maybe the prompt is, hey, look over the last given our last meeting, incorporate how the last meeting and the last 3 months or 6 months worth of conversations kind of intersect, and give some
Yeah.
tips and trips and highlights and all that kind of stuff. And you get those push notifications. And if you spent a half an hour a week just reading through the content from the prior week and connecting some of those dots, some of those things that you wouldn't think about. So right now, what I'm hearing you say is like, hey, you're prompting it and you're going in and you're asking it questions, which is
Right.
fantastic. But it would be great if you got a push notification with some of that already played out. And then
Yeah.
you could go in and go, tell me more about that. Or what do you think if I said this or that? Giving you the opportunity to have kind of a thought partner going into those meetings. I think the more time that we can think about our clients, the better we'll be. And so for a long time, I've always preached like leverage, push tasks down,
Yep.
automate things, you know, if we can get the computer to do stuff for us, fantastic. And don't get me wrong, like the computer now is trying to think for us a little bit, but they're not going to be able to do it in the way that the human brain works right now. They have all the information, but and it has knowledge. It doesn't have expertise. We have the expertise to kind of read between the lines and understand the differences and what those cues are. And so, if we can combo those two things, pull in all that knowledge in a structured way, and then you use your expertise to like kind of shape it a little bit, the client's ultimately going to win in that run.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And I do want to take a second for anyone who hears this and says, okay, I haven't really started a lot with AI, so you guys are way ahead. I can't catch up. Just starting to record the meetings, and we're using a tool named Avoma. Going in and doing things within Avoma, you've got an AI feature in there. And I will say 100% of my client meetings are recorded, and people are getting used to meetings being recorded. So if people think it feels weird to have a recorder sitting there, I've had a few times where clients have said, would you mind stopping the recording because they want to talk about something they don't want recorded? Cool. Of course I'll do that. But they are really used to it. And now I've got that. And I've also got clients saying, hey, since you recorded it, this person couldn't be here. Do you mind sending them the recording? And so then they're even seeing value from that piece. But that's a start. If someone's saying, I'm not using AI currently, they've got AI built into these things. And then you can get the broader thing like you're talking about of agents going out and looking and delivering things to you. What about when it comes in the context of financial storytelling? And so one example I'll give that I think has worked well, and it's more of a client, but we're doing with our internal stuff is I've got a client, John, who in his AI, he has put in, here's my company strategy, here's my annual plan, here's what I'm going toward. When he puts in his financial statement, he gets back a really strong response from AI with things like, looks like you're not on target with your plan. Here's some spend areas you're over. I would watch these things because he's given it the context. I have used similar kind of things and it's great. It doesn't replace the work I do. And so I like to sit down and do the planning and say, okay, what's my message? And feed that in and say, what else do you see? And it's almost always finding a few additional things that are really valuable. And so I think the risk could be I could get really lazy and say, oh, AI just tells me what I should say to the client. I turn around and just repeat it back to that. But I'm curious your thought when it comes to looking at the financial information, how you present it to clients.
I guess that's kind of my point. It is scary whenever the clients are doing that for themselves because
Yeah.
it's kind of like the map that takes you down the old road that goes over the cliff sometimes. And so I'm not saying what he's giving you is wrong. I just believe that what it's lacking again is expertise, and I'm going to keep
Yes.
coming back to that. Is it knowledgeable? 1000%. Like, did you overspend in those areas? Sure. Does it have some good suggestions? But it doesn't have the context to why you spent those things, how that works, why it matters to you. Like as much as he tries to pump that information into his agent, I mean, I still feel like human intelligence has and wisdom has a little bit of an edge here over all that stuff. And so even the clients that are sophisticated like yours, still need to know that they can trust the information.
Yeah.
It, I
Yeah.
mean,
I agree.
that futurist, I mean, you took a good quote from her regarding that kind of same thing.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So Crystal Washington was her name, and her comment was, "When information becomes abundant, trust becomes scarce." And information is abundant. I wonder at times, are we starting to look like doctors several years ago who are like, "Man, everyone's Googling everything and walking in and saying, 'Give me this drug because I've diagnosed myself.'" And you could be in the same thing, but you want them to trust you that, just like you said, Adam, when they're coming in saying, "AI told me all this, here's where I'm going," that they trust that we're looking at and going, there's an element, but you need to consider like these three important things that AI didn't get. And, hopefully, as you said, you wanted to exit in 3 years. So then doing this that AI suggested is an opposite of what you're trying to do, or whatever the other things are that's where I want them coming saying, "I'm overwhelmed with data. Help me."
I think that's a great example. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I always tell people you have to advocate for yourself and you should be knowledgeable. So, do your research, trust your gut, like go into that doctor's appointment, you know, on firm ground. But at the same time, as doctors probably would tell you, is like, WebMD basically like everything you ask it, you're either like dying of cancer or the very last thing it says, or you have AIDS.
Yeah.
you know, like you could type in like a foot fungus or something, or it
Yeah.
could be due to HIV, and you're
I
just like,
love
what?
it.
Where did we go from like, sore toe to HIV? Like, holy cow. So
Yeah.
you obviously and people don't completely trust, but it is a good source of information so they can start to filter out things for themselves, right? So
Yeah.
once they're doing their own research, they can go, oh, you know what? Actually, I don't think it's this because I don't really have these things. I have more of these things. And they can do some of their sleuthing because a lot of times with the doctors specifically, you're catching them cold, on what those things are. And so if you can, and you got to be careful though that you don't take them down the wrong track. And so I
Sure.
think as professionals, we have to realize that people might be taking us down the wrong track too, because they've done all the homework and they start to they start to craft the story in a way that maps to what AI is telling them. And so we got to hold them accountable to that and go, yeah, I hear you, and that's true, but this can be true too. What about this? What about that? And so I think that, business isn't as absolute sometimes as medicine is and health. And so I feel like it's our duty to challenge that and push back but I love whenever clients know their stuff. That
Yeah.
doesn't scare me at all. I feel like, don't get me wrong, it's nice whenever they just look at you like, oh, you must be a genius because you know how to read my balance sheet or something. But
Yes.
but I am totally okay with a client that just comes ready to grill me. Like, hey, this is this and this. I'm like, all right, let's get the mat out and let's
That's the fun
rumble.
part,
You know
isn't
what I
it?
mean? Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's enjoyable, and I think we get to really good solutions that way too. That they can kind of get behind, even if all we're doing is affirming what they're saying. We've at least kind of challenged them because I think that at the end of the
Yeah.
day, that's what clients want. And you know as well as I do, like Chad is the ultimate glad hander. Like it's just always like, oh, you're the smartest person in the world, Tom. Great idea. That's a
Right.
fabulous thought. And you're just like, oh, I must be so smart. And it's like clients have told us over and over in the advisory role, they want to be challenged.
Yes.
And so we have to challenge that. And now they've got more and more knowledge whenever they're coming to the table. So we just got to up our game in terms of how we challenge them.
Hmm. And tools like you suggested of could you get a report that says, hey, I've looked across your last 3 or 4 months worth of meetings and things you've done. Have you considered this? Could be really valuable to sit there and say, oh, that's a really good question. No, I didn't think of that. To really, that's an easy way that AI could help you up your game
Yeah,
in doing
because
that.
a lot of it too is like there's a big thing on prompt engineering and stuff like that, and knowing how what questions to ask and those kind of things. I still think that you take those guys that are like low code or even the coders, and everybody's like, well, their jobs are gone,
Yep.
right? Because AI now Adam can code because he can just type in do this thing and it does the code for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Adam's typing in what he thinks it needs to be. They can interpret it. They're on third base already. So while they don't have to spend 5 hours grueling over
Yep.
a formula. They can get to the outcome, like a really good defensible outcome. A builder, a coder can in an hour. That'll take me 3 weeks doing it myself. I was just talking to an AI implementer the other day, and I've got a guy that's in my Vistage group that's amazing at AI, like just
Okay.
amazing, but it's all front end stuff, right? And the AI guy's like, yeah, it's just like the only problem is because I'm a coder, I know how the infrastructure and the back end needs to be shaped. So all these people are building all this stuff on the front end, which is kind of fragile and it won't really hold up under pressure and stuff. Whereas I can spend a quarter of the time that they did, playing around and doing front end stuff that looks good. And I can build a deep infrastructure and put the front end together in a really fast amount of time. So again, the coders of the world, they're not going to be extinct. The challenge is going to be, how do they get that baseline knowledge? If that piece goes away of the building, that's the same thing in our industry. Is how do we teach people that we don't need to know that in order to be more sophisticated on this other stuff?
Yes.
That they're going to run into the same problem. But right now, for the coders, the people that actually can code, they can do it way faster than the individual and way better. Right now, for us, even though that's starting to, and it's not there yet, it's not like the coding, like the accounting still is pretty far away. I mean, I
Yep.
think we're probably a couple years from that, but I think we're in the position where we're on third base.
Yeah.
So yeah, can your client start to ask some of those questions and do some of those things? Yeah, but we're way ahead of him. He's trying to stripe the ball. We're already, like I said, we're on third base. We already know we can we can determine whether or not what that's coming, if it's valuable information or not. He can't.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example, and good reason why we would say embrace that. We love, just like you said, we love it when you're doing that. I have a client that does a lot of work in graphic design, and as you well know, AI can draw pictures. They were totally freaked out 9 months ago when a client came in and said, "Hey, I've done most of what I want with AI. Can you just sort of finish it up?" And their
Right.
reaction was interesting because they were so offended they almost didn't want to work in that. And I was trying to very nicely say, "You're going to have to use that. You should say this is great." Very much like your example with the IT solution, but what we can bring, we really know the essence of what you're trying to do. So it's the picture that really speaks to people, not the party trick, whatever they'd want to say, but you want them saying, cool that you can use AI. We still have a really important role here, having done this so many times, and we're storytellers and all the stuff that they would pitch
Yeah,
around that.
and
But
maybe what ends up happening is you know, you charge 75% of what you used to, but you spend 20% of the time so that you can
yes,
do more, you know what I mean? You become more valuable. There's maybe an opportunity to push, your value up, and yeah, there's a little bit of savings on the end user, but maybe there's a disproportional amount of savings to you in terms of time. Those things
right.
aren't happening right now. AI is still not there yet, but you know, it may over the next couple of years, get a
Yeah.
lot closer.
And if you're that sort of, if I'm the trusted one that you're coming to, okay, the cheap stuff is getting a little cheaper. Okay, that's okay. My bill doesn't go down very much, and
Right.
I'm doing
I'm
the
not the
stuff I
cheap
want
stuff.
to do. And
Yeah.
yes,
I didn't want to do that crap anyway. So good. Good for both of us.
exactly. Yeah. Well, let's try to pull this stuff back together. So we talked about a bunch of different things, but it was, kind of firm model, of course, AI, cross-selling kind of stuff. If you're a small firm owner listening to kind of all these different things, what would you hope people would say kind of, hey, in the next 3 months, here's something I might do a little bit different hearing some of these? And you probably just have to pick one, but kind of what would your thought be around that?
Yeah, I mean, just doubling down on what your value proposition is. That's where I would spend my
Yeah.
time. Whenever you're trying to think of, whether it's like the blue ocean strategy, where are my non-customers at? What am I doing different? Um, I think anytime there's a big seismic shift, it's not necessarily like my advice wouldn't be like go find all the shiny objects and go down that road. Um, let some people, do that themselves, that kind of a thing. Um,
Hmm.
I would focus on my value proposition. I
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
just sit back and analyze, has that changed? Does that need to be modified? To your point with your client that said, hey, yes, I do all this drawing stuff. I can do this and this and this was their value proposition, and I can connect it all together. Well, maybe they just need to take the first link of the chain out and just focus on the other two pieces and get more elaborate on the value that the back end of it brings, you know?
Yeah. I think you're right. I'll answer that very similar. I'm going to steal a quote that Krista Washington, so she was the futurist, had said. And she said, you want to select actions that could protect you in multiple scenarios. So we don't, at least I can't predict where these things are going. But if I were to say, if I start to believe that AI might make things cheaper and start automating those things, and the firm model is changing and people want more services, are there places I could do, to your point with what your value proposition is, to say that would protect me in those cases? And I immediately think of advisory services, being that trusted person that's in there saying, how do I elevate that? So yes, if I can do well today, and if it gets cheaper, that's somewhat protecting me. I don't have to know the perfect outcome.
Yeah.
It's in that case. Yeah, I think that was really good. So I hope people also would take away the idea of stepping away and doing some kind of a conference. For me, this was valuable, like lots of things, of sitting down and hearing people talk about things differently. You're away from sort of the everyday part that I came away pretty motivated. Like, I really want to dig into these couple of areas. There's some things going on that I'm not seeing in my day to day world. And I think doing that occasionally is really important. So I would hope people also would say, are they doing that? When you think value prop, a, some kind of a conference that talks about those kind of things could be a great way to get ideas of what you might pursue with that.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other big conferences you have coming up? Anything you're excited about in the next few months?
Intuit Connect. I enjoy going to
Oh,
that one. That
uh huh.
one's going to be in Vegas. They, from a technology standpoint, they've got a lot of really cool things going on. They usually have it's just a pretty high energy conference. So,
Yeah,
one thing I've got going on.
that's great. I've got two. One on the industry side, the Build a Better Agency next year. So that was in April, and I would hope to go again next year. That was really good. It was very AI focused, but it's the client niche that we've really focused on. And then, as you know, I've gone to the digital CPA, DCPA, two different times. I'm thinking about going this year also. That also is usually a really good conference and very much in the advisory space and in sort of the technical areas that is also really good. So those are two that I'm thinking of.
Yeah. It was definitely a good conference.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Thanks, Adam. This was really good. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks.